to the very first lesson in your geometry book. Now, I wish this could be a really super exciting lesson with all sorts of really neat things going on, but really this is an introductory lesson. It's very basic. We're going to talk about a lot of things that are very simple concepts, but are very important concepts. Now, one thing you're going to notice a lot in here is we are very specific with our language all the time. And we have to use very specific symbols, and we have to use very specific words to communicate ideas. And let's face it, life is all about communication. So communicating effectively is one of the things we're really going to be stressing in geometry, and making sure we're communicating effectively and the exact idea that we want to communicate. So in order to do that, we have some very specific terms and symbols we're going to learn, and we're going to learn those right now. First three are called point, line, and plane. Now, point, line, and plane are pretty self-explanatory. In fact, they're called undefined terms. Although we kind of describe them, we don't really define them. So we have some descriptions, but not definitions of these terms. A point is simply something that has no dimension. It's represented by a dot and a usually capital letter, and we just call it point A. There's no special symbol for it. We just call it a point. A line is something you're more familiar with. A line, when we talk about a line in geometry, it's something that is infinite. It goes on forever, both directions. Not something that has any endpoints anywhere, but is infinite. So lines are infinite. They have one dimension. We represent them with both arrows on the end. It is very important when you draw a line that you get the arrows onto the end of that. If you don't have the arrows, it's not a line. The arrow represents going on to infinity. We name the line. There are several different ways we could name it. We could just call it line L. Notice the L is italicized, a little letter over one of the arrows. So that's one way we can name a line. We can also name a line using any 2 points on that line, and here those points are AB. So we could call it line AB, or we could use the symbol form of that. And the symbol form looks like this. And guess what? The symbol for a line is a line. It has 2 arrows, just like the line does. We could also switch the letters around because order is not important when naming a line. So we could call that line BA, or we could call that line BA this way. So you'll have all these options available to you, but it is important when you're looking at it that you definitely understand that you're naming a line and not a segment or anything else. A plane has 2 dimensions. It's represented by a shape that looks like a floor or a wall, it says here. I always say it just looks like a parallelogram of some sort. Basically, we can name a plane a couple ways. We can name any 3 points that are not on the same line to name a plane. So here I have points A, B, and C. And it's pretty clear that they are not on the same line. So I can call this plane ABC or CBA or plane CAB, whatever you want to call it, any order there. One thing that's very important to note, however, is this M over here in the corner. Notice the M does not have a dot associated with it. That means that M is a name of the plane. We could call that plane M also. M is not a point in the plane. M is actually the name of the plane. And it's not a point because we don't see a little dot associated with it. And there is no symbol for plane. We just use the word plane if we're naming a plane. We've already talked about lines. Let's talk about segments for a minute. Now, here's one that you probably have always used interchangeably, the idea of line and segment, but they are very, very different concepts, and they have to be named differently. Lines are infinite. Segments are finite, meaning they have a beginning and an ending. In fact, in our case, we generally call them both endpoints. Now, that's done very specifically and for a reason. It's because it doesn't matter which one is the beginning, which one is the end. They're both ends. So it has 2 ends. And we name the ray simply by naming the 2 endpoints, A and B. So segment, excuse me. So this is segment AB. Notice the symbol is a segment, and that's the way that we name that. We can also call that segment BA. So, oops, there we go. There we go. Orientation's a little bit off. So that's the kind of thing that we can do when we're working with segments. Hold on just a second. I'm going to quickly reorient the board. Sorry for this little delay in the podcast. This usually doesn't happen, but first podcast of the year, these things sometimes occur. So you'll have to excuse me. There we go. I want my highlights to be showing up in the right place when I'm naming things. So let's try that again. There we go. Segment AB or segment BA. Array, next topic. Array consists of an endpoint and some point along the way. Now, it is very important when naming a array that the first letter that you name is the endpoint first. Okay? So the endpoint, the point that is a finite point for that array, that comes first when we're naming it. And guess what? The symbol for naming an array is a ray. The symbol always points to the right. We always list the endpoint first. So if I want to name the array here that starts at B and goes through A, I don't say, this is very common. I see a lot of people do this, A, B, and they put the arrow that way. That is not correct notation. Okay? We still call that array BA. The arrow is not indicating direction. The arrow simply symbolizes that it's an array. We list the endpoint first and then some point along the way. Another thing important to notice about segments, just to go back to segments for a second before I forget, if there is a third point on the segment, as there often will be, call that X, we never use 3 points to name the segment. We only use 2. We only use the endpoints. Other points along the way really don't matter. Same with rays. If there's a third point somewhere on that ray, we still only use 2 points to name the ray. Now, I could name this ray, I could name it AX, and it'd be the same ray as AB because it has the same endpoint and is heading the same direction. But it's a different name. I certainly would not name it AXB. We save 3-letter names for things like planes, and later on we'll get to angles. Final concept we want to talk about today is the one of opposite rays. Opposite rays have the same endpoints. Okay, opposite rays, same endpoint, but go in opposite directions. Okay, so same endpoint, but going exactly opposite directions. In other words, when you put them together, they form a line. It overlaps at the endpoint. So here, I have ray CB and ray CA are opposite rays. Notice, opposite rays, we don't just switch the order of the letters. That's not opposite rays. They have to have the same endpoint. Very important. Very important. All right, so we're going to practice this a little bit. And again, you can follow along a lot of this in your practice notebook that you have. So you don't necessarily have to print out these notes. There's probably additional examples in there. I don't have time to do all the examples, and I wouldn't bore you in a podcast by doing all of the examples. But we are going to do some, so please feel free to follow along there as you see fit. So give two other names, for line PQ and plane R for part A. So if I look at line PQ, first let's locate that, and this is just good practice. Things you want to be doing when you're doing homework like this. Problems. Locate what we're talking about. Line PQ, aha, there it is. There's line PQ. I want 2 other names for that. So A. Well, I know that with a line, the order of the points doesn't matter, so I could call that line QP, and I have to use my line symbol. I could also call it line QP or line PQ. Now, the little n up here by the arrow is also another way I could name that line. I could call it line N. But N is not a point on that line. N is the name of that line. So things that would be wrong would be things like line PN or line QN. That would be incorrect because N is not a point. Notice there's not a dot associated with it, not a point. For the plane R, first let's locate where that R is. There's R right there. And I know to name a plane, I need to have 3 points that are not all in the same line. So we call that, not all in the same line, has a fancy word. It's called non-collinear. Makes sense, non-collinear. So I need 3 points that make up a triangle, essentially. So I could call that plane R. I could choose 3 points. Now remember, R is not a point. There's not a dot associated with it, so it's not a point. So I need 3 points essentially that form a triangle in that plane. That would be V, S, and T. Or I could do V, T, and P. Or I could do V, T, and S. I could not do S, P, and T because those are all in the same line. They don't form a triangle. I could not use point Q because point Q is not in the plane. I could not use the M because M is not a point. And if you're wondering where that is, again, we'll just highlight it here for you real quick. Okay, M right here, M is not a point. So I couldn't say plane SVM. That would be incorrect. M is not a point, there's not a dot associated with it. M is the name of a line. Next, B. Name 3 points that are collinear, name 4 points that are coplanar. All right, so collinear points are points that are on the same line, collinear. So 3 points that are linear would be S, P, and T. 4 points that are coplanar would be S, P, T, and V. Again, I cannot use M as a point because it isn't a point. M is the name of a line. I can't use N as a point either. If you said 3 points that are collinear, N, Q, and P, and you put that on a quiz, that would be incorrect because N is not a point. So you have to have very close attention. Notice here as I was naming individual points, I didn't say point S, point P, point T. I can just name the points, but I put commas between them to indicate that I'm naming individual points and not plain SPT or plain S or something SPTV. Again, same idea, pretty much the same picture. You have 2 other names for line ST. Name a point that is not coplanar with Q, S, and T. So let's do another name for line ST. First, again, let's locate that. Line ST is this one right here. So I could call that, what's one? How about SP? Or I could call it PT. I could also call it line TS, or I could call it line, here's where you can use that little M, line M, because that M by the arrow indicates the name of the line. A point not coplanar with QS and T, well, again, let's find QS and T. Q is there, S is there, T is there. That's this other plane. Okay, that's not the plane that's drawn in, that's a plane that's not drawn in, but it does exist. And the point non-coplanar with that, P is coplanar, but V is not. So V would be the point non-coplanar. Give another name for GH. When we see the symbol there, it's a bar, no arrows, so that means it's a segment. So segment GH, another name for that would be segment HG. That's the only other name we have. Now, before I go further, I want to note something. I just noticed something on this drawing. I noticed that there's no dot here where these 2 cross. So is J a point or not? And generally, as a rule of thumb in geometry, we can assume where 2 lines intersect that there is a point there. This J is not over an arrow. It's not in the corner of a plane. It's indicating the intersection of 2 segments, rays, or lines. So even though the point is not drawn in there, we may assume that that point exists at a point of intersection. So it's important to realize that that point is there. And that's going to be important because B, name all the rays with endpoint J. So all the rays with endpoint J, we always have to do the endpoint first. So they're all going to start with J. They're all going to have the ray symbol. and those are JE, JG, JF, and JH. And the opposite rays, in this case, the pairs of opposite rays, are JE and JF. JE and JF are opposite, as well as JG and JH. Those are my opposite rays. So again, naming rays with an endpoint of J, you have to start with J. J has to come first. You have to use the ray symbol. Another name for segment, KL. Again, segments are real easy to rename. We just switch the order. And if you want to see where that segment is, it goes here and ends here. Now, some of you are probably saying, but wait a minute, there are arrows on that. That's not a segment, that's a line. You're right. There are arrows there. And I could talk about line KL, and that would include everything. But if I just want to talk about the points beginning at K and ending at L, I can just talk about segment KL too. Segments are parts of lines. We don't always have to talk about the whole line. Next, are KP and PK the same ray? Well, let's take a look at that. KP starts at K and goes the direction of P, so that's going that way. PK starts at P and goes this direction. Oh, so when I draw it, are they the same ray? No. They are not. Are they opposite rays? No. They have different endpoints. They use the same two letters. As the letters go in opposite order, they are not opposite rays. They are not the same ray. They just happen to use the same letters. Are NP and NM the same ray? Well, let's draw it and see. NP starts here and goes this way. NM starts here and goes this way. Ah, yes, those are the same ray. Same endpoint, going the same direction. So again, as you're looking at these things, it really, 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 really helps to draw on the picture or to redraw the picture. And since you have your workbook with you, you can always draw on that picture as well. But if you're doing it in your homework or your classwork, make sure that you're actually drawing pictures all the time and sketching over things and seeing where things are. Don't just look at the picture or look at the letters, but actually draw. Geometry is a very visual, very physical thing, and you want to be drawing pictures, and it really helps you understand what's going on. Lastly, there's going to be a little bit of sketching, pretty simple. Sketch a plane in a line that is in that plane. When we sketch a plane, we generally just draw a parallelogram and a line in that plane. There we go. And it doesn't say we have to put points or anything in it. That's all we really need to do. Sketch a plane in a line that does not intersect the plane. It's a little trickier. But again, we start by sketching the plane, and I want the line not intersecting the plane, so maybe I'll put it up here. And I'll say that that line does not intersect the plane. Sketch a plane in a line that intersects a plane at a point. Start by sketching the plane. And this one's a little tricky, but it's not too bad. We have to imagine a little bit, perspective drawing, and we use our dashed line there, and then there it is coming through like that. So that kind of intersects at a point. Now, you're going to be working on a lot of this stuff in class. And again, this is one of the rather longer podcasts, but there's a lot of very basic information here. When we work on this stuff in class, you're going to be working in groups. We're going to be taking the opportunity to work through this and talk through it so you're not stuck on these types of questions at home. They're pretty basic, but we'll see you in class.